Today we'll be starting with chapter 7, which is transport and flowering plants. And the first thing we're going to take a look at, since we're talking about transport, is the structure of the vessels in the stem and the root. Right, so we already discussed the structure of the leaf, and we have been introduced to the xylem and phloem, right? And we have an idea that the xylem is responsible for transporting water and dissolved mineral salts, whereas the phloem is responsible for moving around, the food substance glucose that has been converted to sucrose, so it's there to move around sucrose. So now we're going to first talk about the structure of the stem. And the first thing we notice in the stem is a layer, an outer layer called the epidermis. So this is a single layer of cells that help to keep the shape of the stem. So it's a single layer of cells helps to maintain shape and prevents water loss. Right, there can be stomata in the epidermis, and so that allows for exchange of gases. Right, in this case, for respiration, so oxygen is going to be taken in, and carbon dioxide is going to be removed. Epidermis has stomata, right, which is responsible. It has a role to play in gas exchange, as we know, right? And so in this case, oxygen comes in and CO2 is removed. And so what we're talking about is respiration. Clear? Yes?
Yeah.
Next up, we have the vascular bundles. The vascular bundles, right, are what the xylem and phloem are called when they are referred to together. Vascular comes from vessels. Bundles. And so you have the xylem that transports water and dissolved mineral salts. And the direction of movement in the xylem, right, is from the root to the leaf, so it's unidirectional. Right, water only flows one way, from the root to the leaves. And then you've got the phloem, right, which transports food, right, up and down. So I'm writing that board to tell you that bidirectional, right? The flow inside the phloem is bidirectional, so bidirectional movement. Right, the plant. So in what case would be moving up? For example, it's taking food to a flower or a fruit. To flower, fruit, or a growing stem. How is it going to go down? Right, the stem itself, the roots. So in those cases, right, we'll be transporting sucrose to the lower regions of the plant. Okay, and so the food includes, you've got glucose, obviously, and you've got amino acids. Okay, so in each of these, right, you've got elongated cells. Right, the xylem and the phloem individually are called tissues. So we've talked about tissues earlier, right? And the mention of the xylem came up, and so the xylem and phloem are plant tissues, and they have elongated cells. And right, they're surrounded by other cells that support them. In the case of the xylem, it is they're only called tubules, so xylem tubules. In the case of the phloem, they're called sieve tubes. So a difference that you would want to keep in mind when you're talking about the phloem vessel, you're talking to talk about sieve tubes, and you're going to talk about the xylem, you're just going to say it's a tube. So now focusing on the xylem a bit, structure of the xylem. As you mentioned, they're elongated cells, but the cells are dead, right? So they don't have any cell content. They form elongated tubules, as we just mentioned. And they're dead, so they do not contain any cytoplasm or organelles, so no cell contents, do not have cell content. And right, the cell walls between neighboring cells in the tubule are digested away to make a long continuous tube. So right, you've got cells, and so they don't have any contents, or not drawing any vacuole or cytoplasm or anything, and so these walls are, when the cells mature, these walls are eaten away, they're digested, And so it makes a tubule in which, right, water is moving up the plant. So in a region where this plant has stopped growing, right, the end cell walls to form a long tube, and right, the cell walls that remain have a substance called lignin. Its mention has come up earlier, right? So it has lignin deposited in it. So they're thickened by lignin. And what that does is it makes the tubes, the walls, remaining walls of the tube very strong and impermeable. And so because of that, the xylem is able to provide structural support, right? So there are two things that happen. One is the xylem provides structural support to the plant, and right, because they're impermeable, they do not allow water and nutrients to pass, right, to outside. So when they're traveling up the xylem, they're not going here and there. And they're supporting cells for the xylem, right, called fibers. So they also have, as the book mentions, long lignified supporting cells. Okay. Specific. Okay. Then there's a region, there's a tissue between the vascular bundle and the epidermis called the cortex. So this is a tissue. So when you're saying tissue, it obviously has cells, obviously. And this is between the epidermis and the vascular bundle. And right, they're often stores of starch, right? And in green stems, they have chloroplast as well, so green, and so they are able to photosynthesize and make their own food. So they have starch, stores of starch, right? Green stems have chloroplasts, and so they can photosynthesize. And within the cortex, there is a central tissue called the pit. So I'll show you how it is diagrammatically represented in the book for clarity. I can just put it on screen. Can you see that? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a diagrammatic representation of a stem. It has been cut transversely as well as longitudinally, right? Both ways. And so what you can see over here, right, this outer pinkish shade is the layer of the epidermis. The white inside is the cortex. And then you see these capsule type things going all around. Those are the vascular bundles. If I just zoom in, right, the inside the capsule, there's this darker shade on the inside, and that's the xylem, and the lighter shade on the outside, and that's the phloem, right? And so there are multiple vascular bundles, right, arranged in a circular pattern in the stem. Okay, so there's not just one. Okay.
Yes.
So here's another diagram showing cells. And so you've got the single layer of the epidermis, you've got the cortex, then you've got the vascular bundles, right? The vessels, again, the xylem, as you can see, right? The long tubules. If I just zoom in, you can see the long tubules, and that, sort of lines and marks you see are lignin deposits. These on the outer edge are the phloem, right? You can see that the cells are elongated, right? So xylem on the inside, phloem on the outside, and this middle region is the pit. And right here's an electron micrograph, I believe, showing the same. The epidermis, the cortex, the pit, the phloem on the outside, the xylem on the inside. Right. So this region is the xylem. Over here is the phloem, and this is a diagrammatic representation of a xylem with thickened bands. Right, lignin. The cell walls have been broken down. Any questions about the structure of the stem?
No.
Okay. Let's go back to the whiteboard briefly, and I'll mention some about the root and show you a diagram of it. In fact, let's look at the diagram of the root first. So I wanted to come back to it. Right, so here we have the root. The root is different. The arrangement of the vascular bundle is different. So the root also has an epidermis. It also has a cortex, right? It has root hairs, which we'll talk about later. And then, right, the vascular bundles are arranged in the center of the root, as opposed to right over here. You can see on the right is how they're arranged in the stem. Right, they arrange the multiple vascular bundles arranged in a circular pattern. Right, over here you've got them all concentrated in the center. A thing to notice here as well is that you've got the xylem on the inside, just like you did in the stem. Right, so you've got this concentrated xylem vessel on the inside, and then it's surrounded by these flowing sieve tubes, right, on the outside. So whenever you're given a diagrammatic, representation, and you're asked to label it and where the xylem or phloem is, first of all, remember what they look like. If they're given as these individual bundles in a circular pattern, then that's the stem. If they're given all concentrated in the center, then that's the root. And within those, the xylem is on the inside, the phloem is on the outside in either case. So just keep that in mind when you're labeling, right? Here's another diagrammatic representation of the root, right? You've got the epidermis and the cortex and the xylem and the phloem, and right, other things such as the root of region of elongation and cell division, root cap, and all of that, which we'll talk about. So keep that in mind as I just go over the explanation. Switch to the whiteboard. Okay. So with the root, right, you've got again uh, the vascular bundles arranged in the center of the root. Just put that over here. So they're arranged in the center. And again, right, you've got both the xylem and the phloem, and they do what they do. And right, it's different from the stem where the vascular bundles form a cylinder. So they go all the way around. Okay. So, right, there is an outer layer, but there are other regions in the root as well. So even though it mentions epidermis, it's not distinct like it is in the stem. At the tip of the root, there are cells that form what is called a root cap.
Like, is there a specific reason why vascular bundles are arranged in the center in root and not in the stem?
Uh, it is to, I believe, do with the way water is taken in and moves through the cells of the root to reach the vascular bundles. And so there are certain details which are not part of your O level syllabus in how the root has, there are other structures within the root. There are certain layers and the movement of water which make it selective as to what nutrients can pass through, what substances can pass through, and which are not taken in. So I believe that to be one reason, at least, why the arrangement is different, right? But again, so what those details are exactly, uh, some of them are discussed in A level biology, they are obviously not part of the O level syllabus.
Okay.
So yeah, the tip of the uh, what way was it? So a root cap is present or at the tip of the root, and it is made up of cells. And what these do is that they protect the tip of the root as the root grows and pushes through the soil. So these cells protect the growing root tip as it pushes through the soil, and because of that they are replaced frequently. Okay, so with that we'll talk about a bit more about the structure of the root and uptake of water. So root hair cells. So above the root tip, right where the root has just stopped growing, what you have is, you know, cells of the outer layer, so the epidermis, so to speak, that have cube-like outgrowths. Right, and these are called root hairs. So they're not the kind of hair that animals have, obviously, but they look like hairs, and they are more prominent if you've ever pulled out a seedling. So the roots are sort of furry, right? Appears like they're hair on the root, and that's what they are, right? They're root hairs. And so the cells that have those elongations are called root hair cells, and so they look like uh, you have a cell, right? You've got a vacuole and a nucleus and other stuff. And so this is a root hair cell. This might be longer. So this is a root hair cell. And so what these cells do actually is that they grow between the soil particles and are close to the soil particles. So they grow between and close to soil particles. And with that, because you've got so many of them, so in a root, right, in that region, you've got a lot of these guys just above the tip, right? So this is the root cap, sort of, not like that exactly, right? And so this is the tip of the root, and just over that you got a lot of these root hair cells, and they're only present above the tip, right? So they're not present all over the root, just near the tip. And they provide a large surface area for the uptake of water via osmosis. So this is important, what I'm about to mention. They provide a large surface area for uptake of, what are two things they take up? They take up water. And how do they do that? Via osmosis, obviously. And secondly, the uptake of mineral ions, right? Or the absorption of mineral ions. So the nitrates and the magnesium that you mentioned, what are minerates, mineral ions via active transport. So just keep that in mind. It's not simple diffusion, right? It's active transport. So even if the concentration of the mineral ions is lower in the soil as compared to the plant, active transport is employed and they're still absorbed. Right, so if you come across a question, whether in your paper 1 MCQ or paper 2, right, and they ask how is the absorption happening, it's happening via active transport. They might mention, oh, mineral ions. They might ask, oh, how is nitrate taken up, or how is magnesium taken up by the roots from the soil, and so you say active transport. Okay. Any questions? I'll take that as a no. And so root hair cells are only, they only live for a short time in that particular region. As the root grows, they die off. Only live for a short period in the region above the tip. And why is that? Because as the root grows, right, the cells die, the root hair cells disappear, and then new root hair cells appear, right, in that in that newly grown region. So the region, the region that is just grown will have new root hair cells growing, and the ones at the top will shrivel. And the region of the root which is above the root hair zone,
What does shrivel mean?
shrivel means that they shrink and die off, so they're no longer there.
Okay.
The region of the root above root here zone is, you know, the layer becomes less permeable. So the cells are less permeable, right? And so water cannot easily enter from there. Now, how does water actually, move through the root? And so what happens is when the water enters the root hair cells, it is passed to the cells in the root cortex. And from there, it enters the xylem vessels and moves up into the stem and then to the leaves. Now, what makes it, move up? And so we'll talk about transpiration, right? And so there's like a pull generated because of transpiration, and that is what promotes the movement of water from the root up the stem and then to the leaf, right? So there's a tension in the vessels developed due to transpiration. Tension, right, meaning a pull. And obviously once it reaches the leaf, right, it goes through the vein, the midrib, and then the veins, and then finally into the mesophyll cells. Now, how does the water, travel through the cortex? Because you saw the structure, and so how does it travel through the cortex to reach the xylem? And so it is believed that water passes between cell walls, right, rather than through the cytoplasm of the cell. So in the root, from the cortex to the xylem, right, water moves in between cell walls. What does that mean? That means you've got two cells, right? And so water is coming in, and it's, let me use a different color, right? So water is coming in and it's moving like this, right? It's not going through the cell. No, it is moving in between cell walls. And so, right, that is also diagrammatically represented uh, in the text, and it just shows once it enters the root hair cells, right, from there it moves towards the cell walls, and then cell wall to cell wall, neighboring cell to neighboring cell, and finally reaches the xylem, and then moves up to the stem. Any questions?
No.
Okay, so far so good then. So then we shall talk about transpiration. So the definition of transpiration is the loss of water vapor from the leaves. But there's a lot more going on than just oh, water's lost, that's it. Right, so what happens is, due to various factors, but other than that, by itself as well, water evaporates from the surface of the spongy mesophyll. So we know that in the leaf you've got the epidermis and then the palisade mesophyll and the spongy mesophyll. Right, so this is how transpiration looks like. You have water coming in from the xylem, right, and it goes to the palisade. So it goes to the palisade mesophyll cells, and from there it goes to the spongy mesophyll. Right, and this is occurring via osmosis. Right, so xylem has the highest water potential, and so water goes to the palisade because it's lower water potential, and then the palisade mesophyll cells have a higher water potential. The spongy have a lower water potential, and so water goes to the spongy mesophyll cells. Now, if you remember that there are air spaces in between the spongy mesophyll cells, so what happens is that water evaporates from the surface, right, of the spongy mesophyll cells and goes into the air space as water vapor. So it's no longer liquid, right? Water vapor is gas. And so from the air spaces, it moves out of the stomata into the environment. Now, keep in mind, this is happening via diffusion. Water, right? Why? Why is it diffusion? Why is it not osmosis? Because now it is water vapor. So osmosis only applies to water in its liquid form. Okay? Because water has evaporated from the spongy mesophyll cells into the air spaces, it is now water vapor. And so from the air spaces, it moves out of the stomata, through the stomata, into the environment. Water is lost via diffusion. And so questions are frequently asked in past papers. Oh, they give you the pathway and they tell you what process is happening. And so this movement is via osmosis. Going into the air spaces, water is evaporating. And then from the air spaces out the stomata is diffusion. So that's something you want to remember. Okay. Now, water that is transpiring, so meaning that it's being lost from the leaves, water transpiring from leaves creates a suction. It creates a pull. Right? And that pulls water up the stem. and that goes all the way to the root, which is talked about, right? So what is forcing, because the root is down in the ground and the leaves are way up top, right? And they're very high, right? And in larger trees, they can, go up to 50 meters or so, which is pretty high. And right, so this suction is so strong, right, that it's able to pull water all the way from the roots up to the highest leaves. And so this flow of water is called the transpiration stream. All right, is that clear?
Yes.
Now, right after this, there's a mention of the factors that affect transpiration. So humidity and airflow and all of those things, and then the importance of transpiration, and then finally translocation, which is the movement of food in the phloem. And so I leave that for next time, right? Hopefully you'll be able to cover all of that the next time, and perhaps move on further to nutrition in humans. I believe what chapter 8 is, right? Human nutrition, yeah. So we'll come back, we'll continue from here the next time. All right? That's all for today.
Okay. Allah Hafiz.
Allah.